glad that we're so happy that everyone has been able to join us, and a big warm welcome. We have a few more minutes just to allow people in from the waiting room. And great, I see our panelist, Joao Campari, has joined, so we can make him also a co-host. Thank you. Great, excellent. So my name is Lee Winowicki. I am a soil scientist at C4ECRAF and also one of the co-leads of the Coalition of Action for Soil Health. And we are so excited, honored, pleased to be hosting a 2023 Borlaug Dialogue virtual side event as part of the World Food Prize Foundation. And today we're going to really galvanize multi-stakeholder action for scaling soil health globally. And as you know, one of the themes of this year's Borlaug International Dialogue is about harnessing change. So what does that mean when we talk about harnessing change? And coming out of the UN Food Systems Summit, which we'll also discuss a bit in the panel, is around food system transformation. So this panel, this event is really about how we can harness change and be agents of change for food systems transformation. And why is that? Why is that? So we have several objectives of this session, and one is to of the critical role of healthy soil for multiple ecosystem services, from sustainable agricultural production, food and nutrition security, biodiversity, climate change mitigation and adaptation, and restoration of our landscapes, of our ecosystems. We also want to showcase the progress on two key coalitions that came out of the UN Food Systems, and in particular, Action Track 3, which was led by WWF and UNCCD. And we have Joao Campari on our panel later, so he can really be proud of this progress. And then finally, to highlight, collaboration and partnership to scale and finance food system transformation, and including healthy soil ecosystems. So really, why are we here today? We're here because we know that the latest reports are showing over a third of the Earth's surface is degraded, negatively impacting 3.2 billion people. This photo just highlights visible soil erosion, which is the most widespread form of degradation. Therefore, business as usual is not an option, and targeted investments in soil health, food system transformation are urgent. Anyone who's from Northern Kenya, and we have a panelist here, a youth panelist from Northern Kenya. This is from actually a conservancy in Northern Kenya from Kalama. And you can see how this devastating soil erosion is not allowing the soil to provide critical ecosystem services. So one of the coalitions that took root in the UN Food Systems Summit is the Coalition of Action for Soil Health. The goal is to improve soil health globally by addressing critical and real barriers to implementation, monitoring, policy, and finances. So if you put your phone up to this barcode, it takes you right to the website, or if you're old school, you can type in coalitionforsoilhealth.org to learn more and to really join this movement. And we have 4 targets, and these are integrating soil health into policy, but not just agricultural policy. We think soil health has a place in climate change, development, environment domains. Also, let's answer key remaining knowledge gaps and expand action research on soil health practices and monitoring. We have a goal of increasing the number of hectares of land under healthy soil practices. And then finally, in something that our panelists from WBCSD, World Business Council for Sustainable Development, will talk to us about, is how we can realistically increase investments in soil health above current financing commitments. So let's get some engagement going. We have a poll. So Frederick will get us our fingers going in terms of a poll of what is soil. So this is our poll. What is soil? So go ahead and let's answer these questions. Get engaged in the webinar, and what do you think what's the definition of soil that really speaks to you? And you don't have to go to the old school definitions, anything that you want to bring to the table on your definition of what is soil. So just go ahead and start answering that. And I can share with you a little bit to get us warmed up in terms of our definition, the definition I really like, which is that soil is the biologically active layer of the Earth's surface. There's many definitions, but I think when we start thinking about soil as a living entity, and Dr. Lau will talk about that, and that we have physical components, biological components, and chemical aspects. So this is what we like to think of when we think of what is soil. The second poll question is, what does soil health mean to you? A lot of people are having a debate around soil quality. That was in the 90s, early 2000s, now soil health. And we'd really like to hear from you in terms of what does soil health mean to you? We've already highlighted that there's the Coalition of Action for Soil Health. But what does soil health mean to you? So feel free to answer these questions as we go on and at your leisure so that we can really start gathering some feedback from you and understanding what is our starting point when we are talking about healthy soil, soil function, soil ecosystem. So as you know, soil provides many ecosystem services, from filtering and purifying water, habitat for organisms, food production, providing nutrients for plants and animals, carbon storage. And this is really why we should care about soil. And so essentially, one of the new dimensions that CASH brings is we see soil as a unifier, an entry point for all of the food system transformation, climate change action, biodiversity. So now is the time for multi-stakeholder action to reverse land degradation, galvanize collaboration, and we have just the panel to do this. So I'm so honored that we have such an esteemed panel today. I'm your moderator. We will start off with a keynote from Dr. Ratan Lal, who won the World Food Prize in 2020 for what? Soil-centric approaches to transform food systems. Then we have Elise Golan from the USDA, and she'll be representing the SPG Coalition. And then you can see our esteemed panelists, where we're really not going to let them get away with business as usual. I'm going to ask some tough questions, and you can see the diversity from private sector to youth to conservation. So I'm really looking forward to this event. I warmly welcome all of you, and I thank you for joining us. And with that, we will kick off with a fantastic keynote from Dr. Ratan Lal. And so, Frederick, you can just go ahead and roll the tape, as they say, and we'll hear the wisdom from Dr. Ratan Lal. And please keep answering the poll. Go ahead. Thanks, Frederick.
I want to thank Dr. Leanne, and her leadership is very critical to the CASH program. The topic assigned to me is the role of healthy soil for the people and the planet. Coalition for Action on Soil Health was launched during the UN Food Systems Summit as a part of the Action Track 3. And the CASH calls specifically for the establishment of a multi-stakeholder coalition to facilitate the adoption and scaling of soil health restoration practices with outcome for growth, productivity, rural livelihood, climate, and nature. The private sector can play a very strong role in supporting Soil Hub by recognizing the need for private sector participation and engagement, acknowledging tangible outcome-related goals and solutions, highlighting the work that is being accomplished through existing initiatives and alliances, and emphasizing the need for science-based approaches and measurements. and we appreciate the support from the private sector. Long-term objective of the cash are the following: enhancing cooperation among multiple stakeholders, promoting on-the-ground adoption of best management practices, developing tools for measurement, monitoring, verification of soil health and its indicators, advocating a system-based soil health agenda, implementing an action plan for restoring soil health, developing a protocol for payment for ecosystem services, empowering farmers and managers to adopt best management practices, strengthening human resource capital, enhancing respectability of soil health profession, and alleviating drudgery of farming operations. In this regard, it's very important to state that soil is a living entity. Therefore, soil, like any other living thing, has a health. And the soil health is defined as a soil's capacity, being a dynamic and biologically active entity within natural and managed landscape, to sustain multiple ecosystem services. Several of them are very critical to human health and well-being and to achieving sustainable development goals of the United Nations. The key indicators of soil health is the soil organic matter content. It is the sole driver of many ecosystem services, such as water resources quality and quantity, climate change mitigation adaptation, food security quantity and quality, and biodiversity both above ground and below ground. Indeed, soil organic matter is the heart of soil health. In other words, if we take a pyramid in which global soil resource and carbon pool is the base, four sides of the pyramid would be ecosystem services such as food security, climate change adaptation mitigation, water quality, renewability, biodiversity, and the stability and durability of this pyramid depends on the coherence of the four apexes where they meet together through policies, political stability and peace, and political willpower to promote agricultural activities which are pro-nature and pro-farmer. Therefore, 21st century green revolution, rather than input-based such as variety, fertilizer, irrigation, which are essential, but the focus is on soil-based concept, which enhance soil resilience, which improve ecosystem efficiency, and which adopt and promote science-based management. And this management must be nature positive, such as through mitigating climate change, reducing emissions and increasing carbon capture, regenerating and protecting critical ecosystems, reducing food waste and energy usage, and without undermining health or nutritious value of the diet. There are many technological innovations which are developing very rapidly between 2020 and 2050, and several of them include recarbonization of soil, pro-nature agriculture, saving land for nature, climate resilient agriculture, eco-intensification, rhizospheric processes, phytobiome management, urban agriculture, and sky farming. Sky farming also means space farming, soil processes under hypergravity conditions, robotics and soil-less agriculture, precision or digital agriculture, the nexus approach, nutrition-sensitive farming, farming soil with plants that emit molecular-based signals for remote sensing and targeted intervention, and of course, farming carbon. Farming carbon is a very important concept. It also is based on soil health and its management through regenerative agriculture, digital agriculture, artificial intelligence, biofortification, soil water energy nexus, building new soil, and urban soil or soil-less farming that can create a drawdown of atmospheric CO2 and mitigate climate change. How can we bring soil health agenda forward through cash? Is the right time to bring the soil health agenda forward at a local, regional, national, and global level. Cash was evolved from the Food System Summit, and its need is recognized globally. However, operationalization of cash necessitates action at national level to promote nature-based solutions to global issues such as advancing the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. Carbon farming, as I mentioned, is a process in which carbon becomes a commodity that can be grown, like we grow other crops, or corn, soybean, or raise animals, which can create an income stream for farmer. But this carbon farming means evaluation of all important greenhouse gases like CO2, CH4, and N2O, and calculating them as CO2 equivalent. And one carbon credit is 1 metric ton equivalent of CO2. Human health has a strong impact on health of everything on the planet, such as plant, animal, human, environment, and the planetary processes. This is based on the nexus concept that when we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. This brings us to the final concept which CASH is promoting, such as developing and implementing Soil Health Act as a complement in the US, for example, to Clean Air Act of 67, Clean Water Act 72. Hopefully, we will have a Healthy Soil Act of 2024 Farm Bill, or whenever it may appear. And this will be policy tool to promote CASH objectives and protect and restore soil health, which is essential to avoiding global famine, which currently are being aggravated by political disturbances in many parts of the world. And therefore, it's appropriate to state that famines are indeed man-made tragedy, human-made tragedies. Therefore, we must make these tragedies created by humanity of mass starvation politically intolerable, morally toxic, ethically unthinkable, and humanly unacceptable. This citation, this theme, this concept, this idea is more relevant today than ever before as the tragedies are unfolding throughout the world. Thank you.
Great. So we can give Dr. Lal a virtual clap for really setting the scene, putting soil at the center of the SDGs and so many of the challenges that we're facing. And I love his ambition. So at least you have to follow that with the Soil Health Act. I'm sure this may be something exciting we can pursue. And with that, it is my sincere honor to allow Dr. Elise Golan, the Director of Sustainable Development from the USDA, to really showcase this SPG Coalition and to bring us up to date on the progress. And we've had such a pleasure to interact together through the UN Food System Summit. And I am so grateful to co-host, Cash is grateful to co-host this dialogue with you. So Elise, please go ahead and share your screen and take it away. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lee. It's really a pleasure to join you this morning, and I hope you can see my screen, the whole screen, and I hope you can hear me. So I am Elise Golan. I'm the Director for Sustainable Development at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I'm also one of the co-leads for the Sustainable Productivity Growth Coalition, where it's our great pleasure and honor to co-host this event today. So what does productivity growth have to do with soil health? Well, it both depends on soil health, and it's necessary to help conserve and sustain soil health. But before elaborating on that, I would like to go back and remind everyone what agricultural productivity growth actually is. Agricultural productivity growth measures the efficiency with which inputs are used to produce outputs. Productivity growth is not necessarily more production. We can have an increase in the efficiency of resource use without any increase in production. Productivity growth reflects less total input use per unit output, including less land, soil, water, and other inputs. Well, why is this so important? Quite simply, without agricultural productivity growth, we will not be able to meet our sustainability goals. Let's think about the challenges that are facing agriculture right now. Agriculture is being called on to produce enough food to meet current and future nutrition needs, to keep food safe, affordable, and accessible, to ensure decent livelihoods for farmers, farm workers, and others engaged in farming. Agriculture is also being called on to conserve natural resources in the face of ever-tightening natural resource constraints, and to adapt to and mitigate climate change. And each one of these challenges is difficult on its own. But the kicker is that agriculture has to meet all of these challenges simultaneously. Agriculture will fail if farmers are bankrupt. It will fail if natural resources, including soils, are degraded and climate change worsens. And it will fail in its fundamental mission if food is scarce, expensive, and unsafe. Agricultural productivity growth is one of the only approaches for simultaneously meeting all of these challenges. Now, why do I say this? There are two main reasons. First, in developing economies, agricultural productivity growth is still one of the most powerful engines for alleviating poverty and food insecurity. According to a 2019 World Bank report, 2/3 of the global extreme poor earn their livelihoods in farming, and productivity growth in agriculture has the largest impact of any sector on poverty alleviation. Second, agricultural productivity growth is also a powerful engine for resource conservation and climate change mitigation. This conclusion is reflected across the literature. For example, a 2019 World Resources Institute study concluded that if today's levels of production efficiency were to remain constant through 2050, then feeding the planet would entail clearing most of the world's remaining forests, wiping out thousands more species, and releasing enough greenhouse gas emissions to exceed the warming targets enshrined in the Paris Agreement. And that's even if all emissions from other human activities were entirely eliminated. In fact, we would essentially eat the planet. The Eat-Lancet Commission comes to a similar conclusion, finding that the transformation to a sustainable food production by 2050 will require at least a 75% reduction of yield gaps. And according to OECD, FAO, and the FAO, to achieve the zero hunger targets in the SDGs, while keeping agricultural emissions on track to reach the Paris Agreement targets, average global ag productivity would need to increase by 28% over the next decade. That's incredible. We simply cannot make the math work for meeting all our challenges with low productivity agriculture. Raising the productivity of existing natural resources, including soil, rather than bringing new natural resources into production, is critical for sustainably meeting food security needs of current and future generations. But we need to do it right. We have to aim for productivity growth that truly and holistically addresses the challenges confronting us. In other words, we're aiming for sustainable productivity growth, which in the SPG Coalition we describe as agricultural productivity growth that advances the social, environmental, and economic development objectives to meet the food and nutrition needs of current and future generations. This is not a one-size-fits-all technological solution. It depends on place-based strategies appropriate to different geographies, crops, farm types, markets, and socioeconomic conditions. It depends on enhancing and safeguarding the natural resource base on which agriculture depends, including soils. Now, to help accelerate sustainable agricultural productivity growth, the United States and a number of partners launched the Coalition for Sustainable Productivity Growth at the UN Food Systems Summit in 2021. And the coalition seeks to promote a holistic approach to productivity growth. It currently has 117 members, including countries from every region of the world. FAO is a member, has a large number of academic organizations and think tanks and industry groups. And we welcome new members. So please check us out. Go to our website. I need to put our hashtag up there so it's a little bit easier for everyone to find it. But for the moment, I've only got the links posted there, but the slides will be shared with everyone so you can find out more about our coalition and how to join, and also more about ag productivity growth in general. On our website, these resources are translated into multiple languages. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the rest of this fabulous side event. So tossing it back to you, Lee.
Great. So let's give Elise a wonderful round of applause. And thank you so much. That was really fantastic. And I actually learned a few new things about your coalition as well, Elise. So I'm really glad we did this. So what we'll do is people can write questions in the chat. We'll have a Q&A after. And so thank you so much. So now I am so pleased to welcome our first panelist, Dr. João Campari. And he has a long history with both Elise and me in terms of leading us, shepherding us through the UN Food System Summit process. So João, I really want to give you some space to give us your perspective on some of the successes of this process, and then specifically in your role as WWF International Food Practice Lead, what are some of the initiatives that WWF is taking to really instigate food system transformation? Over to you, João.
Thanks, Lee, Elise, Ratan. Look, first of all, I'm delighted to see all of you again. I mean, we worked so hard and so well together during the UN Food System Summit, and with the discussions that we've had for a long time. It was a process of about 2 years, 19 months, or almost 2 years. I think we're quite successful as a collective to bring food systems at the epicenter of climate change and biodiversity laws, which are themes that for WWF are super important, of course, as a conservation organization. So I'm delighted to hear all the progress that have been happening. And yes, we should all be collectively proud of our accomplishments. But Lee, let me, first reflect on the question that you posed first. What is soil to you? I am an environmental economist, right? So soil to me is the planet's most valuable environmental asset. And as such, we need to begin to treat it as an asset from the management and investment perspectives. And this is simply because soil is critical for food and nutrition security, as we heard from Dr. Lau, limiting temperature rises and preventing biodiversity loss, right? So if soils are treated poorly, they will erode and dry before literally blowing away in the wind. And the consequences of this would be dire for people and the planet. And this is why WWF puts soil as a fundamental part of our work to sustain its health, to rebuild soil, to avoid degradation, and so on and so on. So although soil is such an important asset, 50% of all farmland is degraded today. So soils are unhealthy and either underperforming or underproductive, which threatens food and nutrition security. So with business as usual, land degradation over the next, say, 25 years could potentially reduce food productivity by at least 12%. And drive up food prices by 30%. These are some of the estimates that we've been working with. So less healthy soils doesn't just reduce yields. It also is forecast to reduce the nutrition density of crops. So overall, if we don't treat soils well, we will end up having not only less food, but food of lower quality, which will put exacerbated pressures on more conversion of soils to produce more food and get the nutrition density we need. So this degradation, of course, has many causes, right? But we cannot ignore the fact that a very large share of soil loss has been driven by unsustainable farming methods, right? So we urgently need to adopt nature positive and climate neutral production to the extent possible at scale and urgently. We must move away, and we discussed this a lot during the UN Food Systems Summit Action Track 3, which was to boost nature-positive production. So we must move away from a model of extracting from nature to produce food, to farming with nature. We need to move also from short-term thinking about maximizing yields to planning in an integrated manner and accounting for the many environmental and social benefits of that healthy soils provide. And I'm particularly happy for Elise because she made this point very clear, why yields are so important. And, we should not think of yields just output per hectare or something like that. She put it beautifully. So let me just, every time I talk about soil, I talk about climate change and biodiversity loss. But let me talk about something different, just a few remarks now about it. Yesterday we had a moment for food and soil, right? And the theme for this year's World Soil Day was water, was fresh water and food, right, on the World Food Day. So just a single hectare of healthy soil has the potential to store and filter enough water for 1,000 people. This is amazing when we get these statistics. So, and there are $50 trillion in hidden and indirect economic value of water and fresh water ecosystems, including enhancing soil health, but also purifying water, reducing the impact of extreme floods, and building resilience to drought. So, when we talk about soil and food, we cannot afford anymore to be water blind. We need to bring fresh water into the epicenter of all efforts to conserve soil health. So at WWF, again, we have global initiatives that bring all this together. One of them is the Grasslands and Savannas Initiative, because up to 80% of all food come from grasslands and savannas, or what they have once been, because they were converted to produce more food, right? So we also care a lot, and we have initiatives on stimulating agrobiodiversity. Today about 75% of the global calorie intake comes from 12 plants and 5 animals. Of all the plants and animals that are there for us to enjoy as a diverse diet, we cannot continue to rely on this very small set of plants and animals that put huge pressures on the environment. So there is hope, and I'm very proud. We at WWF are very proud for the collective accomplishments we made with the Coalition of Action for Soil Health and other coalitions that are out there. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts with you, and thank you for what you're doing. Over to you, Lee.
Great. Thanks, Joel. Don't go away. I really wanted to follow up with you. I think it's absolutely fantastic how you are bringing together these different dimensions. You mentioned you like to talk about biodiversity and climate change, but also water security and how everything is connected. I know in the food practice, you also do a lot of policy work. And so I was just wondering if you wanted to take 1 minute, to just highlight how you think influencing policy is an agent of change. And then, within the coalition, we have agreement that it needs to be evidence-based policy. So maybe you could talk about the role of evidence, the role of policy, and how that influences practice on the ground. Joao?
Wonderful, and I'm glad you limited my time to 1 minute. Otherwise, I could spend the whole hour here. So don't give the microphone to a Brazilian. We can keep talking for a long time. But here's the thing, Lee. Policy is super important. But when we talk about policy, we need to think about policy design and policy implementation. There are many places in the world, many countries that have great policy in the books. But when you look at the landscape, you can see that there is there is a distance between what's written policy and what policy implementation is happening or not happening in this case. So in terms of the policy design and influence, I mean, we at WWF, we are pushing for the inclusion of food systems transformation in the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, so that we keep steady progress towards the road to Paris, and limiting climate change to 1.5 degrees. So it's super important that countries begin to put more and more food systems into the revision of their NDCs. Because if we don't bring food systems into some form of discipline, we will not be able to achieve Paris, right? And it's important, the food systems, not only agriculture, but we need to manage food loss and waste and reduce that as much as possible, and also be thinking about the impact of our diets and move towards healthy foods, but that are less resource intensive. So that's on climate. On biodiversity, there is the National Biodiversity Action Plans, the NBSAPs, as we talk about it. So food systems are responsible for about 80% of the biodiversity loss. So unless we bring food systems into policy and in the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, again, we will continue to see conversion of important ecosystems and the habitats for many species to be declining. We cannot afford that anymore. So in terms of the policy design, these are the two things that we need to do. NDC, food systems in NDCs and NBSAPs, and then we need countries to design their pathway, their roadmaps for action. So we're also working with them so that the policy that we design at the global level can be actually implemented by at the national level. Thank you.
Fantastic, João. And let's give João a round of applause. And thank you to the World Food Prize Foundation for also live streaming and really making sure this conversation is broadcast as broadly as possible. So thank you so much, João. You gave us some tangible actions and entry points for policy. And now I'd like to invite our second panelist, because this is a great segue from João's first point about thinking of soil and the soil ecosystem as an asset. So I'm so pleased to invite Kate Newberry-Hyde from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, so we can spotlight her and bring her onto the stage. Hi, Kate, thanks for joining us. Great.
Hi, Lee.
Great. And so I really want to hear your perspective. I want to ask you about what you think are some of the key drivers for corporate investment in soil health. And as you answer that question, if you could follow up with some of the key measures or metrics or indicators, KPIs, whatever the corporate language is, for really measuring the impact on the ground. So a big warm welcome to you, Kate. Over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Lee, and thanks to the whole coalition team for your leading work in this space and for inviting us to hear from so many experts today. So happy to share a bit of some of our learnings from the private sector perspective regarding investing in soil health. So I work within WBCSD in our agriculture and food sector team. So we work with around 50 large private sector companies right the way across the ag and food value chain. So maybe I can share a little bit on why companies are investing in soil health, so some of the business case, a bit around the what, so the type of actions we see the private sector taking, and then to your point, Lee, a bit around the how, so what are some of the enablers and challenges that we're working with members on. So starting then with the business case, I think the good news is that we see the business case for the private sector to invest in soil health becoming increasingly clear. We see private sector companies realizing that soil health can bring financial returns for their company, whilst at the same time building social and environmental resilience. The amazing thing about soil, as has been discussed, is that it really connects opportunities around climate, around nature, around equity. But what we hear from companies is it's really important to get quite specific on what's the business case, and that can really help to galvanize investment behind soil health. At WBCSD, we developed with members a soil investment guide, which sets out a bit of the key messages in terms of the business case for investing in soil health and some of the types of investment mechanisms for the private sector. I'll just touch very quickly on the 5 key drivers that we covered in that report. So the first piece is around climate change, and this is often the entry point for many companies we work with. You know, they've set ambitious climate targets. There's a real recognition that soil health is critical to that through carbon sequestration, but also beyond the mitigation side, there's the adaptation aspect of climate as well, and the critical role of healthy soils in ensuring resilience to physical climate risks. The second piece is around biodiversity and natural capital, as has been covered. I think for the private sector, frameworks such as TNFD, the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, have really shown that natural capital is completely critical to the future success of agricultural value chains. So that's a real driver for the private sector as well. The third piece on livelihoods. So we know that business needs to ensure that farmers and producers have a long-term source of income. These are their suppliers. And then fourth and fifth, very closely related, the pieces around health and nutrition. So ensuring that crops can be produced to meet the needs of future generations. These are the ultimate customers for many agriculture and food value chain players, and very closely linked the protection of water quality and availability. And as Joao mentioned, this has really been put to focus this week with the theme of World Food Day. So in summary, for business, I think there is a recognition that nurturing and restoring soil is essential for resilient agricultural value chains. Thinking then about what does this mean in practice and what types of actions we see the private sector taking, there's kind of two sides to the coin here. The first piece is we see many companies focusing on working or productive land, so the land which is used to grow crops, to grow livestock, which is directly connected to their value chain. So we see an increasing focus from members on supporting producers to drive agricultural practices to support healthy soils. So one focus for us at WBCSD has been convening members and partners with a focus on regenerative agriculture, which has been seen as a little bit of a fluffy term. So we're really working with members around setting the framework, setting the metrics to measure the outcomes of regenerative agriculture practices, with including a real focus on soil. And then the other piece to the coin, if you like, is the non-working lands. So lands which are ecologically or geographically linked to agricultural value chains. So a lot of important focus needs to be given to avoiding deforestation or conversion and supporting restoration of those lands. So you can see how that represents quite a paradigm shift in terms of the way of thinking about the agricultural value chain and the production of the food that we eat. Most of the companies that we work with do not actually own the land, and that's really an important note, because that's where their most significant impacts on climate and nature lie. So for that reason, collaboration across the value chain is really the only way to unlock the action at the level of the landscapes. So finally, Lee, just to pick up on your question, you asked about some of the enablers of corporate action. So I think there's kind of 3 key challenges or unlocks that we currently see around corporate action on soil health. The first piece is around standards. So the kind of rules of the game for corporates to measure, set metrics related to soil health is a very fast moving space. And this is really needed to ensure consistency and credibility when the private sector is talking about action on soil health. So some of the big frameworks and pieces of guidance coming out do include soil health. It's great to see. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which is setting the rules for accounting emissions from land-based emissions, includes a focus on removals, including soil carbon sequestration. That will be really important for corporates when they're considering how soil fits into their climate targets. On the nature side, the science-based targets for nature, which are supporting the private sector to define measurable targets around nature. That includes targets related to land, which include addressing soil pollution, for example. So it's really great that this critical guidance is including soil as a part of that. The second piece, though, is on data and accounting, and this is a really big need that we see from working with the private sector. So how to go about collecting data relating to soil health. And that's really important because only through data can companies identify where to target interventions, how to measure the impact of those interventions over time. There's a huge amount of innovation in terms of monitoring and measurement technologies, thinking about innovation in the area of remote sensing, for example, which is really expanding access to data, but that's a challenge for companies to navigate, how to find credible data sources, how to work with partners on the ground to make that happen. And then the third enabler, just to wrap up, is around landscape level action. So finding the right kind of incentives and support structures for farmers, looking at innovations in terms of cost sharing and co-financing some of those practice changes on the ground, working with policymakers, as has been mentioned, and the finance community is a key partner for many private sector players as well. So I'll close there, and maybe just a final remark within our team at WBCSP. We've been really trying to support pre-competitive collaboration and innovation. And through that, we've been seeing that businesses can have an enormous impact in terms of nurturing and restoring soil health. So thanks, Lee. I'll pass back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kate. That was brilliant. And of course, being a scientist, I immediately zoom into your comment around data, credible data sources, and really this need to fill these knowledge gaps. And we have two more panelists, but I want to give you 30 seconds. Can you just what is your viewpoint on why we see this increased investment in soil health? Do you think that it's a triangle effect of advocacy, science, awareness? You know, what we're seeing, soil health is gaining so much momentum from all different stakeholders, private sector, governments, research, development. So do you have any insights for us on what really is that, motivation point for this continued engagement in 30 seconds? Easy question, Kate.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. Well, part of it for sure is a testament to the hard work of folks like yourself who've been so active in the space and really, I think, helping to clarify the connection between soil health and climate and ecosystem services. I think from a private sector angle, there's just such a proliferation of guidance and standards around how to report your impacts related to climate, nature, and then increasingly equity and livelihoods as well. And soil just is an important part of each of those frameworks. So I think that's really driving, as you mentioned, the need for corporates to get much more granular in terms of measuring soil health, thinking about how their interventions can positively impact soil health.
Thank you so much. And I just love surprising panelists with questions with no warning. So thank you so much. Let's give Kate a round of applause. And I think that was really insightful. And now we're going to shift to the other side of the spectrum. I am so pleased to invite Adrian Litoro. He is the co-founder of Nature and People as One, and he's now a global landscape GLF restoration steward. And I know you just love speaking after private sector, Adrian. You feel really comfortable about that. So I always want to put people out of their comfort zone. But really, Adrian, I invited you here today because I want you to specifically talk about implementation on the ground and really what is the role of youth for driving change. And please feel free to take a moment to explain what GLF is and what NAPO is. Over to you, Adrian.
Thank you so much. I'll try to keep private sector out of the conversation, but no promises. But my name is Adrian Litoro. I'm the co-founder of Nature and People as One. Most of our work is based in northern Kenya, where we work with pastoralist communities in terms of governance and restoration of important landscapes that are critical for, of course, biodiversity conservation, but also climate change adaptations. The areas specifically we target are the dryland forests, which we kind of refer to them as water towers in Kenya because of their ability to provide ecosystem services. And when we talk about soil health and there's huge degradation in this landscapes, but we have to look at it, yes, of course, from the restoration perspective, but also from the governance perspective, which is These are communities that are lands that belong to communities. And so we have to kind of work with the existing structures and existing governance structures to be able to scale soil health. And maybe the definition of soil health may not be clear at the local communities from an English perspective, but these are communities that have lived in these landscapes for the longest time and understand the land. In terms of when we're talking about soil health, I think it's a foundation for a pastoralist community. Soil health is the foundation. Healthy soils are the foundation for healthy livelihoods, right? So because these communities are dependent on the land. And so if we don't have healthy and productive landscapes, then this results in losses in livestock, in cultural values as well. Just recently, in the recent drought, I think we lost 4.25 billion livestock, which is huge considering that this is the livelihoods of these communities. From a youth perspective, I look at it from a general and then look at it from a more specific point of view. I think from as young people, we are the most interconnected generation. We're able to speak, we're able to link to people from different areas. So I think one of the huge roles of young people is getting this information out there. Listen, TikTok has about 1.7 billion active users, and I've not even gotten started on Twitter, or is it X now? That I'm not. So I think that's one of the huge areas also in terms of advocacy and policy influence. We now have recognition of young people as constituents of the UNFCCC, we have the UNCBD, we have UNCCD. So this is also a platform to kind of get the message in terms of why we want to address soil health and increase positive practices for soil health. But at the end of the day, I think we need to also look at, we can do the local actions, but it needs to be done at scale. And this is, look at the ecosystem around Africa youth. So there's a healthy ecosystem on SMEs, and this is where the private sector comes in. I think there's a huge opportunity to come up with innovative ways to scale soil health but of course this has to be supported by patient capital, by patient resources that recognize that maybe there's no collateral, maybe there's no we have to give young people some time to be able to figure out the solutions and help them develop bankable solutions. But also, lastly, I think we have to remember that restoration or addressing land degradation doesn't take one day, it doesn't take a short time. It's a long-term process. So we also have to consider that in our programming and in developing our projects. Thank you.
Adrian, thank you so much. And actually, your last 2 points really feed well from what Kate was saying around the importance of clarifying the connection, the advocacy, the communication around the connection between soil health and these other ecosystem services. And I think you highlighted quite clearly how youth are really instrumental in that. I was wondering if you could also talk about kind of this movement, this massive momentum around youth-led NGOs, youth-led restoration projects. Like, I've been so impressed with what I'm seeing with the restoration stewards. You only have 1 minute and I'm going to time you and hold you to it. But could you just talk about what is some of the motivation around this youth-led restoration movement? And you have to unmute. Go ahead and unmute. Yeah, good. Got it.
So when we talk about youth-led restoration movement and the Restoration Stewards program, it's basically recognizing that there are young people actually in the landscapes, in the different landscapes, could be drylands, could be oceans, could be peatlands, who are actually doing important work to address biodiversity loss, climate change adaptation, soil health, and giving them a platform to be able to do this and their work being able to be seen for more support. I think in terms of youth-led restoration action, I think the critical issue here should be, how do we get young people involved in decision-making at both local, national, global levels, make sure that we actually have a seat at the table, not just outside of the table. And number two is also we need to recognize and support youth initiatives as well, considering that this is the future. Okay, this is the future, this is the now as well. So we need to have more collaborations, more meaningful engagements with young youth-led restoration movements so that we integrate the learnings and the capacity in a way that is you're doing it as you learn, right? So not just on the theoretical perspective, which is sitting in a classroom, but also actually being involved in the heavy, huge restoration projects so that we learn from those and actually develop our capacity from actually implementing. But it is also, just before I finish, I think it's important to design programs recognizing the context, right? So not a one, I think it was mentioned before, a one size fits solution. It has to recognize the different contexts that we have and the different groups of youth. So youth can't be just youth. You have to look at rural youth, pastoralist youth, but also the youth within the towns. Thank you very much.
So let's give Adrian an amazing round of applause. Meaningful engagement with youth. I'm so grateful that you took time to join us, Adrian. And now our last and fabulous panelist from wears several hats. So Jacqueline Hannum, I welcome you to the panel. And I think it will feed nicely from what Adrian was talking about, because you represent Cranfield. You also represent the British Society for Soil Science. And I know you're doing a lot of engagement with citizens, home gardeners, policy. And I would like to ask you about, some of your experience, including in the soil inquiry. That is a very British term, and so I love saying it. So over to you, Jack, and I hope that our IT Fred will spotlight you. Jack, go ahead.
No problem. Thanks so much for the invitation, Lee. We're absolutely delighted to be partner in the coalition. I think we need 2 hours for this webinar, don't we? That's true. But I will just briefly introduce a bit of the work we've been doing through the British Society of Soil Science. So for those of you who are not aware, we are an international membership organisation and charity. So we're kind of committed to the study of soils. We primarily bring together people in academia. That's kind of how we started. But we've got a really big membership in practitioners working in industry and just everybody essentially that has a keen interest in soils. But as you alluded to, we've been working a little bit more closely with policy. So we've been trying to do a few things to engage primarily 3 types of things, really: promoting and providing evidence. So that's one thing that was flagged earlier. Second one is kind of like building relationships between kind of research and policy and thinking about policy design. So Zhao touched on this earlier. This is great. I can refer back to those brilliant topics that have been sort of highlighted before. So yeah, sort of promoting and providing evidence. So it was recognised by the UK government. There was a big report of the state of the soils in the UK that we knew that the soil health was declining over many decades. Between the 1980s and the year 2000, there was some monitoring, and around about 40 to 60% of the soil carbon was lost from cropland soils in the UK. So this kind of promoted an inquiry in government, and essentially there's loads of very odd and strange kind of committees that you have, but they can kind of question some of the government departments. So that was launched this year to actually find out, what the current state of the soil is. Are there policies in place in the UK that can benefit soil health and protect soils going forward? So this inquiry, we submitted some written evidence, and because we have this absolutely brilliant membership base that have all of that scientific evidence that they can provide for specific points in the inquiry. So we were invited to sit in Westminster in an oak panelled room, a bit like being in a courtroom, actually giving evidence to the MPs in person. So we were providing some up-to-date information on the state of soils in the UK, what has been happening in terms of their response to kind of intensive agriculture, but also what the solutions are. So what are the sorts of things that they should be doing to devise sort of policy? So this was like a really important ask, that we were able to highlight to the ministers in the room there to say, there's no actual overarching soil policy in the UK, like many places. It's in lots of disparate parts of policy. So that was one of our major recommendations. And also, to work with land managers on the ground to start to implement some of those practices. Everyone's jumping on the regenerative agriculture bandwagon, but to think about, how they can actually support people on the ground through incentives and policy support systems. And then Kate mentioned about data. This is really important. So we already know historically that we've lost this huge amount of carbon in the soils, but we have no current baseline at the moment to understand where that is going, what has happened in the last 20 years. So we really need a kind of systematic kind of monitoring program. And this is not currently active across the UK. Northern Ireland are currently pioneering a soil nutrient health scheme, and this is absolutely globally pioneering. They are sampling 700,000 fields in Northern Ireland. And Northern Ireland is only 14,000 square kilometers. It's really small. So they're doing this really intense sampling to actually find out and to bring new evidence into policy. So we've been working then directly with MPs. We've also been producing kind of guidance notes. So Kate was talking about these metrics. So we've been publishing, based on our members' sort of expertise, particular things about monitoring, verification, reporting on things like soil carbon. So really important in the finance market at the moment. And then we're trying to kind of bring together different silos as well. So that building relationships, the second sorts of thing we're doing, we are actually integrating researchers directly with policymakers. So we hosted last year a policy day at an international conference. It's mainly for kind of researchers, but it brought together both researchers and policymakers in the same room, both giving talks to start to engage with evidence and integrating that into policy design. And then finally, thinking about these kind of policy design and implementation. So Zhao touched upon it earlier. So we've been designing new ways of working. So how do you start to design a new policy? We've been doing that with the Welsh Government. I've been seconded into the Welsh Government with a team of researchers working directly with the policymakers. So bringing that scientific evidence straight into the policymaking arena, but also working with everybody in the room that is going to be affected by that policy. So co-designing that ambition with a farming community, with ENGOs, with research and with policy. So the idea is to look at then, looking more holistically at bringing together all of those skill sets to hopefully realise a kind of policy ambition for part of the UK. So I'll leave it there, Lee, and see if you had any other questions or comments from us.
Well, Jack, thank you so much, because I think one of the key goals of a webinar like this and coalitions is really this knowledge sharing. And so now exactly. I'm hearing 700,000 soil samples. So what are other countries doing? And I'm hearing this really is how you're spearheading this conversation to really co-design policy. And I think these types of lessons are exactly what we need to be sharing and encouraging and motivating other nations to do this, and
Absolutely.
I look forward to realizing our dream of this policy event. So Jack, I'm sorry that we're running out of time, but I really appreciate all of your insights. So I want everyone to give a round of applause for our brilliant final panelist, and thank you so much. And then with that, I think we'll just follow up with that. We have several other engagement events. I hope people who will be attending COP28 in the UAE will find us in the Food Systems Pavilion. And I know that WWF has their Panda Hub, and we'll be hosting World Soil Day on the 5th of December. And then with that, I realize that there's questions in the chat. I hope that some of our panelists will answer them live in the chat. And I encourage everyone to reach out to Elise, to reach out to us. I put the website in for the SPG. I put the Twitter, and you can follow us on LinkedIn for the Coalition of Action for Soil Health. You can also scan the barcode. So with that, I would just like to appreciate everyone here on Zoom, on the live stream, on all the future watching of this video within the World Food Prize Foundation. And thank you so much to the 2023 Borlaug Dialogue. And I would like to close this webinar here and by thanking everyone for taking the time to join us. Thank you so much.